on.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. So you're sharing the
Yeah.
computer.
Yes.
So we can also expect Ian to join us, right? I didn't receive any message that she won't be able to make it.
No, yeah, she's supposed to be here. I'm calling her on WeChat, so she's going to join on Zoom, but
Okay.
her audio will be on WeChat because it's much easier to hear her.
Yeah.
But it seems she might be having some issues with connection.
Yeah. So how are things going? So this is like the crunch time, or because they end the academic school year or academic year earlier here in Finland compared with the other countries. Usually it's in May. That's why they envy teachers for having like a 3 month vacation. But
Amazing.
now it's like 2.5. So
Wow.
yeah. In Denmark, it's until end of June. So it's just the usual.
Yeah, in Spain too. It used to be at June when we finish all the exams and assignments. So now it's quite early for me.
Yeah. And then June, of course, you could enjoy the midnight sun here.
Yeah.
Long days.
Nice.
And kids are going back to school
Yeah.
on Thursday.
Okay.
Interesting.
That's good.
There was a debate between the medical experts and the teachers union. So the medical experts said that it's relatively safe. The teacher said, what can we still do? I mean, there's only 2 weeks left in this school year.
Oh, okay.
And it's a holiday, I think, on the 21st of May, something like that. Yeah. So, and the medical experts won in their calculation. They said that children don't usually get serious complications. So they only get mild symptoms, and then they rarely transmit the virus to others. But then if you open the websites these days, like Yahoo News, for instance, and you would read comments coming from the governor of New York that they found really some serious issues about the virus, that it hits everybody, including children, and yeah, there's so many, yeah, many different claims at the moment. It's difficult to decide. Yeah.
Yeah, it's 80,000 deaths in the US right now. We're pretty freaked out because they're opening up and like everybody's acting like, oh, it's over. And there's just like more dead people every day. It's crazy.
But in the university, we have decided to be closed until the end of the school year. But then it's an indication in Finland that they will also slowly opening the university. There's some confidence in here, because if you look at the statistics, it's still comparatively better than the others. Even in Uvascular, I mean, Keski, Suomi, I mean, here in our region, since a month ago, the cases were just between 1 and 3. And the patients are sent not here in Quezco Sayrayla. So the patient is sent either in Copio or Tampere. And yeah. Then of course you see many elderly also walking around here. Yeah. So how are your classes going on? So are they also concluding?
I think
Yeah, we're finishing and we have a lot of deadlines too. So
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is the thesis proposal that we have to turn in.
Ah,
yeah, for next Friday. So we've been working a lot
yeah.
in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would, yeah. Usually the thesis proposal keeps on changing. They look different all the time.
Yes.
Yeah, that's so
It's
true.
like,
Yeah, we actually all had to redo our research plans, so it's really stressful.
yeah, it's still a puzzle. I mean, I've been in the program for 6 years. Even in the last meeting I had with Tina and Tepo, I've been asking that question because you actually take so many courses on research methods. So you have research problem, you have thesis seminars and all. And then because I'm not assigned to this research problem or thesis seminar, so I don't really know, how it's conducted. So I just supervise thesis students, and then when I start reading their drafts, I'm somehow lost also, and then I wonder, about the progress of students in research methods and the thesis seminars, because somehow those are not reflected in the way the student would write their thesis. It continues to puzzle me actually. Yeah.
What do you think are the differences like between the way we would write our thesis and like
No, because I taught also in Denmark. I was a PhD fellow at that time, and I think our students there in Denmark finish their thesis on time or earlier than the students I've had here in Uvascular. Of course, my observation needs to be tested. If you would like to be a proper scientist, but I think it's more effective to have like a mentoring system that every student is just assigned to a supervisor, and then the supervisor deals with that student's project all throughout. I mean, mentoring style, rather than rather than being in a classroom teaching all this methodology and all those things.
yeah.
I think it worked because it's what we call problem-based learning. You deal with a specific problem, research problem of the student, and then you advise them specifically on their own project. So students will only be given maybe 2 or 3 lecture sessions on general issues about research methods. And then mentoring meeting with the students, just before it was face-to-face. Now, most likely there will be more of these Zoom and distance meetings. But but that kind of system takes a lot of time on the part of the teacher. I remember, receiving so many emails from students, and I also understand the attitude of colleagues at the moment when it comes to all these teaching demands. Every day our email is just I mean, we are part of many mailing lists, and then we are bombarded by emails every day. And then if you supervise many students, they keep on asking you questions because that is what is demanded of the mentoring system. But yeah, but for me, I think yeah, the mentoring system would work if applied in the program, so or in the University of Vascola in general. It's almost the same. Like I tried that a bit. I mean, when we had that meeting, although we had this group meeting, I look into your draft and then I discuss this to you and in detail and all those things. So something like that, and no more, general classroom meetings or lectures. The lectures are only about methodology. Yeah. Because you work on different topics and different themes and topic also demand different approaches and different theories and concepts. So yeah, the only general thing you could teach really is the methodology. But then having classroom and group meetings are good because you also get feedback from your colleagues, from your classmates. So that's the advantage of that. So I think Yan is here now.
Yes,
Yeah, finally,
Yeah.
the connection is really, really bad. I tried to log on for almost 10 minutes. Finally, I made it. I'm so sorry for that.
Yeah. I would like to change the view to.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, very clear. Okay. So welcome to the 10th session of our course, our last Zoom meeting for the course. And this is the culmination of your learning process. Well, not really the culmination, because you still have to finalize your project document. You still have maybe 10 days from now to, if you still want to refine your project. So in this session, you're going to present your entire project. So you act like a proponent, and then I'll be a donor. So, but it seems that this will be the so-called new normal in in grant applications, meaning that donors won't anymore come to visit Colombia to meet Colombian NGOs applying for grants. So most likely many funders, and it's happening right now, that funders just meet, if they want to have an interview or some discussion with the proponents, they just go and do it online. And I think that would be one of the impacts of this COVID-19 pandemic, even in this, grant application, funding, in the development funding world. So you're going to use PowerPoint. You're going to share it here, and then present as if you're a proponent, and then I will act as a donor. I can just be silent and then ask you a series of questions later on. I think we can finish this in less than 2 hours all in all, because I think some of you would have some engagements.
It turns out it's next week. I totally
okay, sure. So we can take some time here.
Yeah.
Okay, welcome to the United Nations Women Office. So I'm with colleagues here in the gender education desk. You have been shortlisted for the call number this and that. So thank you for submitting your application. We look forward to hearing your proposal.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. We'll really appreciate it. We're a team of 4. We have Clara Garcia Millan. She's the project director. Lara Castillo. She's the finance director. Myself, I'm the education. Nancy Vegas, I'm the education director, and Yan Wang, who is the legal director. And we are Gender Education JED. So during our proposal, we'll first do a brief introduction, give you some background information about the area where we work, how we're aligned with your organization. We'll talk a little bit about the stakeholders and the beneficiaries. And then we'll go into the problem in detail and all the objectives that we have set up to tackle this problem. And then finally, we'll go into detail into the monitoring of our implementation, and finally how we're going to be sustainable for 10 years afterwards, after the project ends. So a broad overview of our project. Our project is around gender-based violence. That's a problem that we choose to tackle in the specific district of Bogota, which is Ciudad Bolivar. We focus on preventing this problem through youth education, both raising awareness and also preventing the problem in the future. After doing a lot of background research and also a lot of participatory meetings, we've identified 3 areas that we know will have significant impacts, the most significant impact into preventing gender-based violence. The first is education of young people around sexual rights, things like consent, contraception, etc. Then secondly, we have gender sensitivity, which is the awareness about gender issues, awareness about gender roles, and lower stereotyping around gender, and also toxic ideas around masculinity, etc. And then finally, we have gender equality, which is raising awareness about the importance of equality with men and women, specifically in government. So we aim to increase the participation of young women into their local governance. So all 3 areas, we seek to educate youth in Ciudad Bolivar, which is one of the poorest districts in Colombia. And we believe that these 3 areas will be able to tackle the main issue of gender-based violence, which is any type of violence that is committed solely because of gender.
Okay, now if we talk a little bit about the background, as you know, we're gonna do it in Colombia. We think that it's important to state some figures that you may know already, but we think it's important to mark a precedent about them. So Colombia is the 3rd place in domestic violence worldwide, and is the 2nd highest country that has a higher murder rate of women. Then Bogota, which is the capital city, has the higher rates of GBV and intimate partner violence in the country. And then lastly, Ciudad Bolivar, which is the locality that we're gonna make our project, is a locality that has the highest rates of IPV in Bogota. And the conditions of the population who live there is that 26% of them are displaced population from violence, and is the 3rd densest locality in the city. Then a little bit about our work that we did with our stakeholders and our local team last year. We made a workshop using the principle of participatory methods, where we were reunited for 1 month, and we were discussing what were the main problems and what was the change that the city hall and that the locality of Ciudad Bolivar want to see in their community. So as a team, we found 3 main problems that are: first, ignorance about sexual rights and GBV; second, there's a machismo culture of violence; and third, there's low women participation in GBV governance. So then when we state these 3 problems all together, then we analyze what will be the long-term change that we wanted for the community. So we agreed that the long-term change will be reduce GBV related to sexual violence, reduce GBV related to machismo, and increase participation of women in GBV governance. Of course, there are a lot of benefits if we do this project in there, and which is related with what currently Colombia and the City Hall is doing in the country. So the benefits will be prevention of GBV, higher reporting rates, and increased accountability, improve gender culture, prevention of GBV, and reduce culture of violence, and increase governance and accountability. And in our view, all of these benefits are related with what currently UN Women is doing in terms of gender equality and gender education.
So we wanted to briefly go over how our strategy is aligned with UN Women. First of all, these are the most important quality and added value elements. We qualify both for the Gender Equality Trust Fund and the UN Trust Fund for Violence Against Women. For all of these are the main areas that we should cover, and we cover them all. First of all, our program aims to engage both boys and girls in the education of youth. So that's a very important part of our project. We believe that in order to really prevent gender-based violence, the boys have to be educated since they're mainly the perpetrators, and girls also have to be educated about sexual rights as well. Secondly, it's a rights-based approach. So we are mainly relying on capacity building for rights holders, which are girls in this case. In that aspect, we also are aligning our efforts with the national legislation around gender-based violence that already exists in Colombia, as well as regional and international legislation that protects women against gender-based violence based on human rights. We also have a very evidence-based curriculum, which is designed to target the areas that previous research has demonstrated contributes to gender-based violence. That's why we chose the areas of sexual rights, gender sensitivity, and gender equality. Then in terms of our population, we deal with a lot of excluded groups. In Ciudad Bolívar, women are in the most extreme levels of poverty in all of Colombia, which means that is the same for a lot of Latin America. Our beneficiaries are also in large part displaced populations. In Colombia, the biggest number of displaced people is concentrated in Bogota. Colombia has one of the largest numbers of displaced people globally, and in most of them are concentrated in our district of Ciudad Bolívar. We also have a lot of strategic partners that we have established with our local partners in the City Council, Public Schools, and National Government, which was fostered over our 15 years that we've worked in Bogota. Specifically, a lot of our work has dealt with Ciudad Bolívar. And this is not just important to the UN Women, but it's also part of the SDGs. Also, our local NGOs. We have a lot of relationships with local NGOs, and because a lot of our workshops are built around education, around participation in governance and leadership, we hope that a lot of the young women participate in local NGOs in the future, and we work with them closely throughout the project. We also work to provide essential services for schools and the local city council in order to allow them to have better relationships with the young women and the young men and then also provide the education needed to meet the SDG goals around access to public information and better, stronger national institutions. And also, obviously, the sexual rights curriculum meets into the national government efforts to educate the public about sexual education. And lastly, as I mentioned, our work meets the already established national commitments to lower violence, firstly, and then secondly, to educate the public about sexual health. So these are all the areas that, oh, and as I mentioned, the laws that are already present in Colombia around femicide. There are a lot of gender-based violence legislation, or there's some, and there's also sexual education curriculum. So all in all of these areas that are specified by the UN Women as being requirements, and also areas that are really important, those are all areas that we cover.
Okay, so now we're going to discuss a little bit the stakeholders, because for us it was very important to understand all the agents that have an influence in the issue that we are going to tackle in gender-based violence. So first of all, the beneficiaries of our project would be all the students, female and male students, and also their fathers, mothers, and the families. Then the providers would be the teachers and the school leaders, because this project would be mainly held in schools. And then the influencers of this issue would be local community, church, religious leaders, local government, local media, social media, and gangs. And basically they have a role in the cultural beliefs of the community and the environment and the security of the place. And then finally we have the governance. So the governance are all these institutions that would give support to our project, such as the donor or national government, local government, and local NGOs. Then, yes, please. We wanted to specify who are our beneficiaries. So our program is planned to be organized in 5 public schools in Ciudad Bolívar. And then we calculate that approximately we would have 450 students, female and male students. And we predict that our impact would be bigger because, of course, these students have families, and our idea is to also involve families, but mainly would be like the participants of our project would be these 450 students. Then we also designed this problem tree. So after being in the field and identifying all the problems, we organized all the issues we identified in 4 main branches. The first one is public safety. So in Ciudad Bolívar, there's high rates of substance abuse, gun ownership, and gang violence. So of course this increase the violence that people live in the streets. And then we also identified a low level of gender education, as Laura mentioned before, and especially in 3 aspects: low sexual rights awareness, low gender sensitivity, and low gender equality awareness and also participation. And then we also have a branch of cultural resistance to gender-based interventions. So in Ciudad Bolívar, there's a big influence of religious leaders and religious beliefs, and this affects the resistance to this gender education, and also all this machismo culture and the acceptance of the society of this gender-based violence. And finally, we also identified a political and legal problem. So first of all, there are not enough laws that protect women against violence. But there's also a problem in the application of these laws. So usually they don't identify most of the femicides as femicides. They only call them homicides. So the application of the law, it's not always properly applied. And yeah, this would be like the broad image of the issue. But in our project, we are going to focus on the second branch, improving youth education, because we saw that there's not any kind of program organized by the government to tackle gender education. So we think that we can implement our project in that area, especially in prevention actions through education. And basically our main objective would be reducing violence against women in Ciudad Bolivar, and we would do 3 main interventions that are related to creating a curriculum in 3 main aspects: sexual rights, gender sensitivity, and gender equality. And our aim is also to foster female participation in political processes. And finally, the long-term goal of our project is providing these structures and these resources to the local stakeholders to continue with the project, to continue with gender education without the need of doing this program. So it would be a continuity by the community by themselves. Yeah, that's all for, yeah.
Great, I'm on mute. The activities that we've decided to tackle in order to carry these out are in 3 main areas. First, the curriculum, then the teacher training, and then the workshops. For each of our 3 areas, we are developing a curriculum in collaboration with specialized experts. Then we have a plan on how to create this curriculum, including the materials that are necessary for the teachers and having those available and approved by our entire team, and also getting the approval from the local government, and making sure that the curriculum, especially sexual rights curriculum, is in line with the national goals for sexual health education. And finally, just making sure that all of these curriculum is in line with the national legislation that the students would have to understand in order to participate in their society, and also dealing with the issues most specifically related to Ciudad Bolivar. After we've developed this curriculum, and it's been approved by our team and the local governance, we'll enter into teacher training. So part of our program, the benefits of our program is that we train teachers that are going to be there in the long term, that are educated in how to teach sexual health, how to teach gender sensitivity, and how to teach gender equality and leadership, especially since one of our aims is to increase leadership in young women specifically. So we'll carry out the teacher training, and after that cycle has ended, and we get feedback also from the teachers in terms of the material that they're using. Throughout the time, we're doing registration of the students, we're carrying out the workshops, we're monitoring very closely the feedback that we get from students. We're doing 4 quarterly reports about that. So at the end of each cycle, we're going to have this go for 3 years. At the end of each cycle, we'll look at the satisfaction of the students. I didn't mention, but at the beginning of the workshops, we're going to do an entry survey, and then at the end, an exit survey. So all of this information will act as feedback for us to understand if our curriculum is being successfully taught to the students, and then that will in turn allow us to revise the curriculum for the next year. The goal is by the third year to have a curriculum that the government can continue to use after we're gone, and then to make sure that those participations from local NGOs, the visits to the City Hall, the invited talks that are part of the gender equality curriculum, which is specifically dealing with leadership. We aim to increase the participation of the young women in our program in their local governance, and that requires these visits. So that is part of our efforts to strengthen strategic partnerships between the local education leaders and the local government leaders, so that in the future they can work together to continue efforts and maybe make the local governance more responsive to this very important issue. So that is, in summation, the majority of our activities. We also have some activities around the production of materials to educate the community, and as well as some for the specialized experts that are needed to carry out the interviews and focus groups that will be part of the exit surveys for the workshops that we'll discuss later in detail.
Great. So in order to implement this project, in this 4-year project, we have made a calculation of our budget. We have made it with our local team and to ensure the local context and all the local expenditures. So we divided our budget in 3, which is the main 3 activities that we want to tackle: improving sexual right awareness, improving gender sensitivity awareness, and increasing gender equality awareness and participation, for a total of 319,280 euros. Our key source expenditure will be human capital, because we need all of these teacher training and these teachers that are related with the local context and know the schools and all the communities. We need them. And of course, we also need our prepared staff to be ready for this, to teach and implement these 3 activities in the schools in Ciudad Bolivar. So this is why our main resource expenditure is human capital. We plan to make quarterly check-ins and follow-ups of our budget in order to ensure its accuracy and to follow up with that the right expenses are going on, which is very important for us, and it has worked for us as an NGO. And so yeah, this is the main part of our budget.
Okay, we paid much attention to the monitoring and evaluation part, and to ensure the efficiency and effectiveness of our project. Please go to the next slide. I will introduce the indicators for each level of objectives first. Laura, please go to the next slide.
It's in the
yeah, and here we color the indicator for each level. For example, in orange, for the overall objectives, we'll collect the official statistics on gender-based violence from DANE, which is Colombian National Administrative Department. At the same time,
sorry, can you go to the previous slide? I think that's the wrong, or the next one, that one. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, this orange one. And at the same time, we collaborate with UN Women and DANE to conduct a survey on gender sensitivity and equality. These data will be collected 10 years after the project is finished, to evaluate the sustainable impact of the project. And then let's see the indicator in pink. For project purpose, the increased rates of gender education will be collected via sample survey, focus groups, and interviews of target groups. And the indicators in green for project results, the data will be collected via entry and exit surveys and interviews and focus groups to collect the data to evaluate the participant satisfaction and accomplishment curriculum objectives. And then will be the green one. Then will be for the indicator for the activities. The activities will be tracking according to the activity schedule. We'll compare the actual progress with planned starting and finishing dates of the activity, and also the milestone dates and events. Please go to in monitoring, when tracking the activity and the cost, we'll conduct the tracking quarterly. If any deviation from the plan occur, the actions will be conducted immediately and try to solve the problem or find an alternative. And the annual report will be prepared for UN Women along with the necessary tracking document. For the formal evaluation, we'll conduct the formal evaluation and the hoc studies annually. Twice. Once is in the middle of the project and at a completion of the project to promote project design and assess the results of the project. Okay, go on. Please go on to the next slide. Just as Nancy mentioned, during the project, we pay much attention to the sustainability. For the institutional sustainability, we apply the participatory approach, and we have a very close cooperation with local NGOs and government and city councils for the institutional sustainability. And during the project, also we pay attention to the localize of the project. We'll invite the local and to not only in designing the project plan and the implementation of the project and the choosing the indicators. So after the project is finished, our curriculum and experienced teachers and the graduate students, all of them can be the vital resources for the educational sustainability. And also one of our goals is to raise the awareness of gender-based violence through youth education in local community. So when a project is finished, in return, the local community can provide the social environment for the future project. Yeah, I'm finished my part.
Okay, thank you so much. We should have had a closing slide, but we really appreciate your time, and we look forward to hearing your questions.
Well, thank you so much. Can you hear me clearly? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks once again for that very interesting presentation about your proposal. So we could tell that you really responded for our call, and we are thankful for your time and the effort that you have spent thinking through the project proposal. This looks promising, and certainly the UN Women has relevant interest in your project proposal in Ciudad Bolivar. So I just have listed here several questions for clarification. So could you tell us more about the process of what we call, baseline study? I mean, how did you study your case In particular, you mentioned that Nancy, for instance, mentioned in the beginning that you did two methods. The first is doing background research. Can you tell us um, who were involved in that research, and what was the main research problem you had in mind when you were still conceptualizing this project? And then the second method that you mentioned was undertaking participatory meetings. How did you do that, and with whom did you do these meetings, and how long did it last?
So Nancy, do you want to answer the first part and I answer the second one?
Sure. For the background research, we worked with specialized experts, including myself, in charge of the education curriculum. And so we collected the most current information on evidence-based ways of educating young people around the topic of gender, these three topics that we also did a lot of research connected to the main sources of gender-based violence, the main contributors related to these three areas. So the curriculum with these three particular areas, they're all based around previous studies that have shown several contributors to gender-based violence, as I went over previously, but I can go over again in more detail. But in terms of our process, we used, both an external specialized expert and myself to find the evidence-based research. Is there anything specifically that you wanted to know around our method in terms of the research?
Yeah. Did you also look into some of the studies that we had at the United Nations, and even some academic research done on gender-based violence issues? So
all of the information that we collected is based on academic studies for the expertise area, right? So our curriculum was developed from the latest kind of findings that we have in gender studies, and then also psychology and sociology for what are the main contributors to gender-based violence. Of course, we use the very wealthy and extensive amount of data provided by UN Women as well. But I guess I was referring more to specifically how we build the curriculum itself.
Having gone through a comprehensive review of literature available in the academia on gender-based violence, and also from our own policy documents and studies at the United Nations level and other organizations, having done all this review of literature, what do you think is a so-called knowledge gap in the field, which is not being addressed yet, both by the academia and also by the policy community?
In general, the biggest gap that we found is that there is not enough inclusion of boys into gender education. So recently, the trend, as we obviously see with UN Women, that this is part of the request, is that boys be included in here. So like our aim was to include boys in all of the areas because a lot of the international focus in the past has been on girls. And since boys are the perpetrators, and there's a lot of issues there in terms of anger management, also around in terms of gender roles and masculinity studies, which is the new kind of trend in the field. That's what we're focusing on in terms of the gender sensitivity curriculum. Whereas a sexual rights curriculum, it's obviously based on both. This and gender sensitivity deals a lot with masculinity studies. So at least that's the area that we think is one of the most important.
Yeah. Yeah. Laura mentioned that that you undertook like a 1 month field work in Bolivar and Colombia. Did you include the boys or parents of boys in your participatory methodology?
Yeah, it was a long process. As I said, we were 1 month in there. So first we started with meetings with the school leaders and with the mayor of the city, and then with the mayor of Ciudad Bolivar, in order to understand how can we help. Then once we have chose the locality and the schools with the school leaders, of course, then we started to do our workshops in the community. We enter in the community, and then in there we were reunited with family leaders, with school leaders, with teachers, with religious leaders, in order to find the problem and together find what will be the benefits and the change that they wanted for the community. So the way that we do it, when we filter it and we were inside in there, we did workshops. The workshops were like 1 day, 2 days, in order to understand everything and to put all the project together. So we include our main influencers and our beneficiaries and governance stakeholders in our workshops.
Yeah.
And part of this workshops also included interviews and focus groups, which are one of the main areas that main methods that we use in our monitoring throughout the project.
Yeah. Talking about the role of boys, and I mean your goals towards, let's say, behavioral change or worldview change of boys as one of the key beneficiaries of your project. How do you see, like, how do you see the concept of empowerment with regard to boys? We already know a lot about empowerment on the part of women and the victims and girls, but how about on the other important actors which you actually identified, and which we are fascinated by the novelty of your proposal for identifying this missing link and emphasis in this focus on addressing the problems of gender-based violence. So yeah, how does an empowered boy, a successful project when it is implemented look like when it comes to, let's say, sexual rights? What should be the boy's view on sexual rights, gender sensitivity, and gender equality?
So one of the and it's funny that you say sexual rights, because that, although that is very important, I think what we found in terms of sexual assault is that it's based on power dynamics, and one of the main problems in all of Latin America, but especially in urban areas that have high levels of violence, like Ciudad Bolivar, is violence. So in the gender sensitivity area, we look at how boys deal with violence and their connection to their gender roles in relation to violence, and their relationship with women in general, but also girls, and the stereotypes that have around that, because we do see a connection there, and we're treating it more as a public health issue, right? So I think our focus on violence is one of those things that set us apart. In terms of sexual health, obviously a focus of our curriculum is really big on consent. So our boys are very educated about what consent is, and the importance of consent, and also so we don't focus so much on the punitive aspects of sexual assaults, of the trouble that they're going to get in, but more around the education aspect, that's why it's so important in terms of prevention, because they're highly educated about all of the specific definition of consent and positive and healthy sexual relations.
Yeah.
I think
When you look at the issue of the relationship between girls and boys, within gender and development paradigm, which we embrace here, the United Nations Women, um, is the relationship between boys and girls in your project when it's implemented a zero-sum game that you empower a girl by disempowering boys? Is that how your project would would also um, uh, have some controversial impact? I mean, sometimes the issue of empowerment and disempowerment are seen as a zero-sum game. I mean, you
Yeah, no,
empower
obviously.
one by disempowering the other actors.
I think
How
that
do you resolve that kind of that issue?
I think that the main idea of our project is that they learn to work together. So it's not about making feel the girls superior than the boys. It's just to establish equal relationships between them, and that they learn how to work together in political processes. And the idea of that the boys are also aware of this situation, and they see that the majority of governmental positions are men working there and not women, and that they also fight for equality, but not like creating conflict between them. It's quite the opposite.
Yeah, adding to what Clara said, is not about empowering girls and disempowering boys. On the contrary, is the idea is to treat them equally and to create a gender culture. Of course, there will be a social change because they haven't been used to this, because usually women are treated as inferior of them. The idea of us is to, like, since they are 15-year-old, since they are young, to like bring this awareness that both of them are equal and both of them have the same equal access, equal rights. So it's to be aware. And then the idea is that they bring this knowledge to their homes and then in the future to their own families. So it's about that. It's about equality and to create a gender culture and to change this mindset in a way, but it's not about disempowering others.
Yeah. But what's your point of entry in your project? You already mentioned that in your background research and study about the macho culture in Colombia, and which is in general all over the world. So you are entering a local community with a very macho culture, and then unequal gender relations is very much institutionalized and in place. So you are starting in a condition, an initial condition where there is unequal power relations. So are you, sometimes there's a danger that you are having a false assumption that you are coming in there on an equal playing field. But it always a tricky on our part here, even in the United Nations, on how to approach, how to enter, a largely unequal structure and system.
If I may answer that. So I think going back to the previous question in terms of the zero sum, which also deals with this aspect as well, we obviously do not assume that the boys and girls have the most positive and equal relationships in school. And that's why working together, as Clara mentioned, is one of the key aspects of our project. And we just didn't want to have a teamwork-based gender program that didn't deal with the very big public health issues of gender-based violence. So educating the boys about the issues that they have and give them awareness about why this issue is important. And coming from that aspect, first they take the sexual rights and sexual and gender sensitivity workshops before they go into the gender leadership workshop. So that gives them more of a public health view on the topic. But the whole point of our gender leadership or gender equality awareness program isn't just to lecture to students about why it's important, but also, as Clara hinted, like we have ways of we have like our workshops integrate not just visits to the government, but also mock like model UN, but for the local governments. So they will all be government leaders themselves and work together in teams and complete projects together. So that will, through those new relationships and teamwork, which by the way, teamwork is one of the key areas that OECD has seen as needs growth in Learn America through PISA studies. So that positive teamwork should set a good example for them and serve as a reference point of the possibilities there. But also in terms of what you mentioned in terms of the zero sum, we do empower boys because running from gender theory and sociological studies, gender isn't just an issue that affects women, it also affects boys. And what I hinted with violence is also that boys are one of the primary victims of toxic masculinity, so to speak. Sorry, just one small thing. I lost it. Hegemonic masculinities are something that we go into the gender sensitivity workshops as well, which is something that the boys definitely will relate to. So we are going with the experiences that the boys are having that makes their lives difficult when it comes to violence in their schools, that makes their school experience difficult in terms of gender, that is very separate from girls. But then we also hint at kind of how it ultimately impacts other people in their society, in their community. So it's not just about victim power relations.
Yeah, based on your studies, research, or even observation in your local case, at what age would be the best time to start gender education for boys and girls?
So our workshops are for, our target group is 15-year-olds, because we believe 15-year-olds have already developed these problematic gender ideas and sexual rights ideas. And then also it's right before they become adults and they leave the public school system and they start sexual activity. So we believe that's the area that is the most impactful for young people.
Yeah.
But sexual health has been successfully taught in many cultures, even in preschool, when it comes to bodily consent, in terms of just, things like that. So it could be any age, technically.
Do you have partners also among like child psychologists?
Yes, we definitely have in place. One of the aspects of our monitoring system is to detect trauma and detect current abuse going on at home. So as part of our sexual rights and gender sensitivity workshops especially, we have a system in place, and also to teach teachers in the school on how to identify signs of abuse. So definitely do have a pool of our local partners and also the local institutions and NGOs present that could help not just the students but also their families as well. So if their mom is in a situation of domestic violence and they alert us, we have a expansive network of our 15 years of work in there, and that's the aspect of their leadership as well, is to teach them how they can themselves become a resource for their communities and their families on what steps they can take when abuse does happen and they witness it or they learn about it.
Yeah, and apart from that, per workshop or per activity, we will have 2 staff members from our own NGO, and they are trained on psychology and on trauma detection and all of these violence trauma. So we are pretty covered in that.
Yeah. So, yeah, we on the issue of alignment, we really see that your project is very much aligned with the UN Women Goals and the SDGs. How about in Colombia itself? Is there any existing legislation on gender sensitivity or LGBTQ rights or um, any affirmative action in the Constitution of Colombia? How is it aligned again to or with the national goals or the local goals of Bolivar?
So in terms of, I think Laura can speak in terms of development, what policies are there, but in terms of the legislation, there is a specific legislation against femicide and gender-based violence in Colombian law. So that is the main legislation that we use as reference for the students. There's a Supreme Court case like 7-8 years ago, which was the first one to have an indictment based on femicide. So there is some legislation in Colombia, and then the local governance is also very committed. And I think part of our goal is not just to look at law as to what exists there, but what is possible in the future. So that's why we partner with local government leaders in Ciudad Bolivar, and why we teach students the approach of how they can participate actively in creating those kind of new policies. But it's not just with the national law, also with the regional inter-American conventions. There's been a few listed in our report. I just don't have it off the top of my head, but it's listed in our report. In terms of all of Latin America, there's been a few human rights and kind of conventions specifically on the aspect of gender.
And I asked that question because you may there may be a need also to do some pressure politics or lobbying, and some organizations which would like to get funds from us. If we could get some idea from your project that there's really this strong need to have a stronger legal foundation on gender-based violence or against gender-based violence in Colombia, we would be very happy to collaborate with them. But it's good to hear from you that there are already existing legislation in there in Colombia, and that what is badly needed right now is implementation. So the precondition for the implementation of project is in place, so that's good to know. But this is also related to yes, Nancy.
Yeah, and just to mention, go back to that, is when we created our problem tree, we identified legislation as one of the areas that could improve, but we noticed that most of the kind of academic papers on it, as you can see here, like the low political and legal action is there. So there's insufficient and inaccurate reporting of gender-based violence cases, and a lot of the issues around that is because people are not aware of femicide and definition of it. They're not aware of gender-based violence as a term, so it's more like the community isn't aware that there is a national legislation in place already, and even the local police. So we could have educated the local police and the local government or jurisdiction or go for lobbying, but we decided to go for youth education because we believe that the reporting rates should be higher, and then the things that we mentioned about.
It's good that you mentioned that. It's actually in my notes, going to the stakeholders that you have. What role the police. I mean, it seems that based on your presentation, there's a need in Colombia actually for a reform of the criminal justice system. So how do you see the police itself or the whole criminal justice institutions in Colombia and Ciudad Bolivar? You know, what role for them in your project?
Well, they will be the receivers of the reporting rates. So as women will be empowered, and they will like know that this is not okay, this is not right, that my partner hits me or that I have intrafamiliar violence. Then these reporting rates will increase, and then police and legal system action will be like aware of this. There will be more and more reports which will make easier to like for them to understand that there's a problem and that there's something to do. So this is the role that they play in here.
Yeah.
Of course, it will take time because it's a long-term change, but that will be the role.
And also our idea, by empowering girls and involving them in political processes, is that they reflect about these issues, and they also bring new ideas to the local governments. So in some way, these girls and these boys that are going to receive these workshops in our program will put some pressure, or will have discussions with people who actually write these policies to put pressure to change all these policies to make it more equal and to protect more women.
Yeah, some of the good practices that we also supported and funded here in UN Women is, for instance, in the case in the Philippines, that the police and military, at least on paper, and it's being conducted, that they undergo gender sensitivity training and human rights training, with the support also of the Commission of Human Rights. So so from the point of view of UN Women, perhaps you could also collaborate with existing actors in
If I may,
Colombia, like the Commission on Human Rights there, who would do. It's difficult, I know, but existing legislation is there for them to conduct gender sensitivity training and human rights training with those state personnel who holds arm. I mean, the police and the military.
Yeah. And we don't, even though it's important to increase reporting rates and the awareness, we don't take a carceral feminist type of stance where we want to increase incarceration rates. Like, even though we obviously want to increase accountability for gender-based violence, incarceration is a huge problem in Latin America. So that goes back to why we're not trying to disempower boys, because a lot of them grew up in fear of prison and the police, and then there's actually culturally a very antagonistic dynamic. So, we don't, I guess that I just wanted to mention that it's very important for us to recognize the cultural resistance there in that aspect, that not all students might consider the police as a rights, helpful entity. So our focus is on the young people, but those are good points in terms of how the police can be educated as well, but a scope specifically is for youth at 15-year-olds.
Yeah, one of the interesting issues that you have raised about your project is that you see intimate partner violence more of a health and education issue rather than a criminal justice issue. And I'm somehow getting some appreciation on this because in a lot of approaches that you're saying, even in the United States, as you mentioned, there's this issue that the US is being reduced also to a carceral state. So it's a prison system that all these domestic and social problems are being reduced to police problems. But how do you argue that case actually at the national and even cultural level, when any violence is just viewed basically as a police or a criminal justice problem rather than a health and education problem?
Well, actually, famous, I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but one of the main contributors to lower violence in Colombia is an expert. He was one of the leaders. I think he was a mayor, and he treated violence as a public health issue, and that's how he was able to detect, in terms of a violence pandemic in a way, the areas in Bogota where, in the big cities where violence was happening, and it wasn't actually gangs, it was happening with during liquor sale on Friday nights and Saturday nights, and around payday. So he responded by kind of setting a curfew on those times and things like that. But I guess it's not the first time that violence has been treated as a public health issue in Colombia. So there's some precedence there.
Yeah, in your problem tree, it's also very impressive and comprehensive. We always encounter these kinds of of pro- um, graphical presentation of a complex issue related to gender-based violence. And a key concept that we're working on here in UN and even in the academia is this concept of intersectionality. You know, how would your project ensure intersectionality in in addressing the problem of gender-based violence? Because it looks so easy to think about it theoretically, but once you implement it, you're just embroiled in all this complexity. And there's always a problem that project proposals just like yours tend to become so myopic. You just focus on this without any relationship with other issues. So how do you ensure intersectionality?
Well, I think that the idea of making education in gender awareness is a way of creating a culture, a shared culture in the community, and this culture in the community can affect the other problems that we identified. For example, if these students that receive these workshops then go home and talk with their families that maybe have these problems with the gangs or substance abuse or gun or ownership, they are already making a change there. Also with the religious resistance about gender issues, it's a way making awareness to the population. It's a way of also doing these changes and also pushing for political change. So actually we think that through education we can affect or we can influence all the other issues that we identified in the objective, in the problem tree.
Yeah, and then,
go
ahead.
So our project is focused on prevention and prevention of everything that Clara mentioned before, on increasing public safety, security, different mindset in culture, and legal political action more reactive rather than focusing only in police problems or just violence problems. So it's about prevention and is related with all of these other problems that we have identified. So once we raise the awareness, we can tackle all of these other problems that are interconnected. And the base is this one.
Yeah.
I raised the issue of intersectionality because there's a need for comprehensive response to the issue of gender-based violence, and can you and I would like also to raise the related strategy to address it, which is called coordination. Policy coordination or program coordination. So can you tell us about the coordination that you would do with your other partners and even with colleagues?
Going back to the just issue of intersectionality real quickly, race and excluded groups like indigenous groups and not necessarily so relevant religious minorities in Ciudad Bolivar, those are definitely just a small part of the gender sensitivity curriculum. In terms of the proposal, like we're not able to write out the entire curriculum, but those are things that we definitely identify as being important, especially LGBTQ education around that gender sensitivity, because trans women suffer at higher rates all over the world, but especially in Latin America. So that is a big part of our gender sensitivity training, even though it's not explicitly said, because the donor call was more focused on the other issues. So we, in response to that, kind of stated our strategy in that aspect. But as we said, we've been working in Ciudad Bolivar for 15 years. So we have a wide network of NGOs, including LGBTQ NGOs, and also displaced populations. So we know the UNHCR, I think it's called, and other organizations are also working in Ciudad Bolivar, as we said, is one of the biggest areas for displaced people. So we definitely collaborate with them to, make sure that our students know who they can contact and what those organizations are there for as a resource as well.
Don't you think that your focus on prevention, meaning your focus on public health and education, also necessitate a counterpart strategy, which is prosecution? And especially if you say that Colombia itself is, aside from the macho culture, it also suffers from the culture of impunity. I mean, the perpetrators, especially the powerful ones, not just politically, economically, but also gender-wise, the powerful ones don't get punished at all. Don't you think that it is also part of prevention that you prosecute the perpetrators rather than just still convincing them not to be put into jail?
Yeah, actually, one of our plans were to create an improved protocol for sexual abuse identification in schools. So our project would also include this protocol to identify when there's a case and to be able to act before everything goes worst. So yeah, the idea of creating this protocol would also help in prevention, in finding these persecutors.
And also as part of the national strengthening of national institutions, which is one of the SDG goals, increasing public access to information and their relationship and with the local leaders will make, in response, the local leaders more accountable to these issues. The idea is to increase public awareness, not just to lower and prevent the violence, as Clara very well mentioned, but also the fact that, they can hold their local leaders more accountable. And that's why we want to increase the participation rates. And the gender equality curriculum is especially dealing with that, is increasing the rates of the number of women participating in local politics, making sure that they understand that, because that in turn will increase the, the accountability measures that are put in place, and making sure that since they're already there, there's already national legislation that it is implemented. That requires continued long-term participation in the public sphere from women, and that's why that's one of the main areas of our curriculum. So even though the point of access is education, we're not the UN peacekeeping forces. We can't go out there and take action in that aspect, but we can increase public participation and accountability of the local leaders.
Yeah. So about the you asserted in that your project will be sustainable by okay. Yeah. So you highlighted the social, institutional, and educational dimensions of sustainability that your project would observe. How about the financial aspect? Would there be any funding needed once you've already trained the teachers and quote unquote empowered your participants? How about this financial sustainability? Here in UN Women, we are always concerned about the financial aspect. Or are you like many other theorists and development practitioners who say that the financial issue is so easy? So we only focus on the more important social, institutional, education, organizational, sustainable issues.
Well, we are very committed with our budget, and the financial budget that we presented will be covered for the 4 years length of the project. And as we said, the project means to be sustainable. So as we're working hand in hand with the City Hall and with the national policies and with the national laws, we are going to ensure that like the city of Bogota includes in their budget these kind of education and this kind of curriculum that we are implementing there. So
are you planning any way of transferring the responsibility to other actors, or you just basically stop the project itself and then assume that the recipients of your projects are empowered enough to continue?
No, a big part is capacity building. Jan, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, in this we apply the participatory approach. We have two main principles. For example, the first one is to cooperate with the existing program. For example, in Bogota, there is a government existing similar program. Even though the government want to have a good plan, but they have some problem in implementation. So the first one is to cooperate with the existing ones. So, and the second principle is we try to find the common goal between our project and the local government and local NGO. So all of the cooperation is not fund driven; it is the common interest driven.
Yeah, because when Clara mentioned, she used the term like continuity by themselves. So it's just like they are totally empowered already, that no more need for intervention coming from the outside. So what do you mean by that?
No, I think that the idea...
An ideal way of sustainability, of course.
Yeah, the idea was creating these structures of these workshops and the teacher training. So these teachers and the school leaders would continue with the project in a local atmosphere. So of course they would need these structures and this curriculum to continue in something that is already created. And of course, we as an organization could give feedback to them, or we will still do these reports of the situation. So there's this kind of evaluation, but the idea is to give them the tools to to them be able to create their own workshops and their own activities, but with the curriculum and the teacher training first provided by us.
Yeah. Yeah, I raised this issue because here at the UN we see social change as an evolutionary process, and then we would like our recipients to avoid having this static kind of thinking about this project. They should design projects that are. We always look for projects that are dynamic, that they keep on adapting to changes and responsive as new situation arises. It's an evolutionary kind of perspective in social change, and also in gender aspects and issues.
Yes, of course.
Even though at this stage, our main target group was the 15 years students, but during the project, we pay attention to the raise the awareness of the schools and local government. So that is to build a sustainable environment for future or for next project. And also, even though our main focus is on the education on kids, but we did have a sustainable plan and to build an ecosystem for gender-based education. For example, we try to empower judge and the police and also public health workers, and to empower them in problem identification. And also empower them in taking appropriate measures and to identify the problem and solve the problem. So in this way, it's not just to teach the kids is the only target. It's a whole. Our goals is to build a whole ecosystem for our project.
Yeah. Okay, in your activities, you identified three main activities. You said, curriculum. Let's just say, aside from the results of those activities, you mentioned curriculum design, teacher training, and workshop. But how do you see us as your funder here in the United Nations? As what would what activity for us as donors, aside from giving you the funding, how can we support your curriculum design, your training? For instance, would you need the experts on our part to join you? Would you need some of our technical assistance?
I think mainly one of the main areas is the collection of data around gender sensitivity. It's one of the biggest issues that we have, because we don't have current, that data is not currently being collected by DANE, which is the Ministry of Health and Education. We're working to collaborate with them to carry out a survey in CWR to measure gender sensitivity. So from that technical aspect, some resources there in terms of that collaboration would be the most helpful at this point. But obviously also in terms of materials and curriculum and getting, assistance in that aspect, those would be the main areas that would be most helpful to have from our donors.
And also from your experts that have a lot of knowledge in the local context, because they have been working there a long time. So of course we will first that you have in there locally, and also all the knowledge that you have gathered and all the reports and data that you have that are very useful for us, of course.
We have actually noted it, because when Yan presented about the MNE, she said that, which Nancy mentioned, that you would need our role in conducting surveys, and that would entail budget, additional budget on our part, but we can talk about that later. So you said that Laura just mentioned about local partners in the activities. Can you elaborate more on how local partners and local Bolivarians would take part in this in these activities on curriculum design, teacher training, and workshops? You know, because we always have this emphasis on local content. And this is also to ensure sustainability of your project, that the local people would be able to carry out your project after 4 years and beyond. Yeah.
Yeah, as you mentioned, this is like the how this project is based. So our project is constantly aware of the participatory methods and the participatory, of course, of the locals in our creation of workshops and curriculums. So of course, we will be working together with the school leaders, with the family leaders, and of course with the religious leaders. And then yeah, like all of these will be like, of course we will have a proposal by now, but we will integrate everything with them, because at the end of the day, as you mentioned, this is for them and this is for the community of Ciudad Bolivar, so they have to be engaged in it too.
And the fact that we use these local teachers to conduct the workshops will help a lot on that, because they are already familiar with the context, and they can adapt our curriculum and our ideas to the needs of these specific students and in these specific schools.
Yeah, and apart from that,
yeah, sure, Laura.
We plan to have workshops with the families itself in order to ensure that this learning that the children are having at school is also reinforced at home. So this is something very important, and we have it contemplated too in our project.
How about, what do you think about the Department of Education in Colombia? And would, based on your studies there and communication, are they receptive? You know, is the government receptive to this kind of integration of sexual rights, gender sensitivity issues in their curriculum?
Yeah, they are, because as a national law, even is written in the Constitution, there's like all the schools should provide sexual education, but there aren't there isn't data to see if students are having this kind of education. And of course, we can see it from the figures that Colombia is the second country in the world of having high rates of IPV. Yeah. So yeah, we are totally aware of this, and it is included there.
One of the main challenges is cultural resistance. One incident is that one of the mayors tried to implement a sexual health curriculum, and then they somebody like the media and somebody kind of made up fake pamphlets that made it seem like they were encouraging people to start like non-gender binary or LGBTQ relationships. So they were trying to make students into homosexuals because they were teaching sexual health, and that they were teaching porn in schools. So there was a lot of backlash from the community due to this. So that we see that as one of the main strengths, that we're providing assistance for the state to implement the policies that they already have in place, the budget that they already have in place, to help them implement it in a way that won't get this kind of cultural backlash.
Yeah. How about in teacher training? Is that feasible at all? I mean, are you not demanding additional time for teachers? If not, would the schools be amenable to allotting or allocating some working hours for teachers uh, to undergo this training that you're proposing?
Our idea was to hire these teachers that are working part-time in the school, so they have extra hours to do these workshops and teacher training. But we are also open to discuss with the schools if they want to hire new teachers that would be paid by us, of course, but or use the teachers that they already have in the schools. But for us, it's very important that these teachers are local and they know the context.
And they know.
So just to clarify that they are paid, so they're part of our budget. So all the hours of participating in the workshops, in the training, teachers are paid. So this would be extra salary on top of what they're earning. So there's a lot of incentives for the teachers to participate actively. Of course, we do filter because we do want to have the teachers that are not going to recreate the problems of gender, but they're paid. That's why our budget is so centered on human capital, because teachers in Latin America don't have the highest salary, so it's important for us to be able to compensate the teachers.
But you're also demanding teachers to be part of the curriculum design and
No, they're not part of. I mean, we're getting some inputs from them, but they're not going to be creating the curriculum. That's part of our staff.
We're going to do it, yeah.
And the experts that we have, and that they're going to be paid for that. The teachers will give us feedback during the training about them, and then the idea is that after you mentioned how we're going to integrate the community to the curriculum. We're getting the feedback from the teachers. We're using some of the students' materials that they've developed in the course, and kind of including like their drawings or their ideas, and implement them into the curriculum. But the actual work will be done by the project staff.
Yeah. So related to that is this budget, your budget allocation. So it looks nice because the allocation is equally divided between your three activities. But don't you think the budget for teacher training is the most expensive? I mean, you mentioned that the main expenditure is on human capital, which we appreciate here in UN because that relates to the principles of sustainability and empowerment. The emphasis on human capital, but it's just like it's just equally divided between your three activities, and then but of course you categorize your activities according to your goals, I mean, or your results. But then just by looking at the activities themselves, it is expected that teacher training, especially that they would be paid, should be the most expensive in your budget allocation.
Yeah, because we're thinking in going to 5 schools, and we will have 15 teachers in total, and our impact will be for 450 students. So we think that, yeah, it is the highest expenditure, but it's the more needed because it's the core of our project. So if we don't have teachers, or if we don't have these training, or we don't have people who conduct this, then there is no project. So they are important, and they are the main the main resource in here.
Yeah, and like partners in health, like the focus is to increase their capacities and their capabilities. So we definitely stand by that.
Yeah, you mentioned, again, going back to the survey, and then you're asking the UN Women to conduct these surveys for your monitoring and evaluation. Are you asking for budget for that, or is this part of the the project proposal you are in?
So we're mostly asking to see if there are existing resources in place for UN Women, because I know they have a lot of connections in terms of data gathering. So more than a budget and carrying out the surveys, we're more focused in collaborating with DANE ourselves, and we wanted to see if the UN Women would be open to the idea of, to see if there are already existing resources that they have. But if not, then it could be worked around. We could include it as part of our budget as well.
Why, again, related to your budget and then the monitoring and evaluation? You mentioned, especially Jan mentioned about sustainable impact. And then there's something that would demand work on our part, especially in our focus on results-based management framework. You mentioned about external post-evaluation, which will be conducted after 10 years. Why is that so? Why
there should be, sorry, I missed it, but there should be kind of that, where that formal evaluation report, there should be a post-evaluation there in 2024, and then there's another one 10 years after, to see whether the things that we sought to gather would still be there after 10 years, because that comes from the donors' request that that it be sustainable on a 10-year basis. Like after 10 years of the project leaves, that they want to see that the changes have still been there. So that's why that 10-year number was chosen.
Do you think that after 4 years you're going to apply for an extension and additional project budget to continue your plans for the community?
I think it depends on the acceptance of, well, of course, of the community, and then because it is only in 5 schools, so it's a pilot, and Ciudad Bolivar is a very big city. So of course, if the locality of Ciudad Bolivar wants our help and wants to like expand it, of course we will be doing it.
Yeah. So who are these? You said it depends. So who would be these people, or what are the factors that you can say that okay, we need to apply for an extension, an additional budget? Who would be in particular? You can say that who would be the respondents of a survey, to ascertain that a project is successful or the project needs to be extended?
For students, so the surveys, the main focus area is the students, their satisfaction rates with the actual teaching, and then also their awareness rates. So we definitely want to see that they have significantly improved on the kind of objectives that we set out in our curriculum. So that would be number one. And then secondly, also the educational leaders and the government leaders locally. And we don't just hope to apply for UN Women in the future. We hope that this becomes part of a national project, and that, we're able to help the government take over this project so that they can do it on a national level, not just in Ciudad Bolivar or in Bogota. But so yeah, it's definitely a pilot to kind of present the possibilities that are out there, and then hopefully the government will take the lead, and that's why we look for capacity building.
Yeah, it's good also that you emphasize that there's a need for beneficiary response, that they are the ones who could really determine and say whether the project has been successful, or they are also the best judge on the basis of monitoring and evaluating your project. So okay, so it's, you mentioned about focus groups and FCGs, FGCs, focus group, FGDs, focus group discussion, target responses. Okay, talking about like the risk and even feasibility of your project. What are the possible, I mean, Ian used this term, deviation from the plan? What would be the, some scenario that would lead to a deviation or a departure from your plan?
I think one of the deviation can be the come from the religious side, because they have Bolivar had a long history of religious culture, and gender or sexual topic is a very sensitive one. So that's why we pay much attention to before the project. We pay much attention to the field research and try to find the appropriate way, and in the project design, and problem identification, and find the appropriate way as strategy to solve the problem. We pay much attention to the localization. So that is to find the appropriate way to make it can go on. So not that the product design just from our own side. It is from the mutual cooperation to avoid the possible resistance from the religious belief.
Can you anticipate any event or instance where you would seek our help? I mean, as here at the United Nations, to manage some risk aside from dealing with the religious matters and issues and religious actors.
In terms of violence, maybe that might be an issue. But most of our risks has been, targeting the possibility of cultural backlash or resistance, cultural resistance in the community. But yeah, I think maybe in terms of violence, the safety of our staff and our teachers, there might be an issue there. That's one of the risks that we detected. But we haven't yet done a complete risk analysis.
So maybe our last question for your organization is, why should we fund your project? Why is it important? Is it urgent?
Definitely. I mean, we think that UN Women is looking to invest its money in a way that will have the biggest return possible, in a way that deals specifically with the issues that it's most it's prioritizing the most. And we see that because we picked the community of Ciudad Bolivar, we didn't just pick any area in Colombia or in Latin America. We picked a community that would have some of the biggest possible impacts in the areas that are important to the UN, so to UN Women specifically. So it's just like a really smart investment because it deals with all of the areas that the organization really cares about, and it does it in a way that is sustainable and long-term.
Yeah, we think that our project can have a big impact in the society and the community of Ciudad Bolivar, and that's why I think that this funding would be very beneficial for all these people living in Ciudad Bolivar. And we are also very committed with our objectives, and that's why we think we can do a great job there.
Yeah, and then it's an innovative project that includes the participation of boys and families, and the community is very aware of what is going on in this project. So this is why our project is suits the call from the UN Women. Yeah.
Okay, on that note. Yes.
Yen?
I'm sorry.
Yen was talking.
Concerning concerning the existing UN Women program, they put much focus in Latin America, and we choose Bolivar, which is have the worst situation. So it is very urgent and meaningful in conduct this project.
Okay. The last question. Do you have any questions to the donor, to us?
So when are we going to have an answer from your side?
So we're going to start the evaluation next week, and then we will have our decision by the end of this month of May. So as usual, you will receive an email from us about the decision. Do you have any other questions?
Is our NGO part of the any top 5 of the respondents of your call?
Yeah, that's why you've been shortlisted in the application. We received hundreds of applications all over the world. So, do you have any? Yeah. So thank you very much to GED organization. Thanks, Laura. So thanks everyone for this session. I think we've done it. It was good. We were able to touch on many issues. Both mostly, I think we touched on a lot of substantive issues. So you're going to work on this project proposal, and I should say that it's professionally done. I mean, the presentation you've made, the visuals, they're really so good, easy to follow, easy to read, you know, aesthetically pleasing, really really good. Yeah. And then and you could use those figures and tables actually in your project proposal. And yeah, let them speak for themselves, you know, refer to them, just, you know, frame a paragraph that's just concise, but you know how, you know, I mean, your generation is living in the Twitter world, so you know how to write witty.
Yeah, I did want to ask, because when we looked through a lot of the proposals, some of them were really wordy. They were like hundreds of pages long, and so do you value more like conciseness? Because like, you know, not every teacher does. So I just wanted to get a feel.
No, not just teacher, but actually as a reader of project proposal, I like concise. I mean, you receive many applications. You appreciate, you know, direct statements, you know, concise. Yeah. So short words with high impact, you know. And write in short sentences, and but it's, as you know, it's a skill. It's so difficult to write short sentences. Twitter is a good training. I think you know, you only have to have like 160 characters. So but of course, in the academia, we are used to reading, yeah, wordy documents. In project proposal writing, usually there are word limits, so follow the word limits. But yeah, just concise, be concise and direct to the point.
In terms of the proposal that we like sent to you, because it seems to me it's a little bit different from other ones. It's a little bit more like kind of simple. So like, do you like that, or do you want us to like make it more detailed? Because I am finding a difficulty between being straightforward and being exhaustive in terms of like covering all the bases. because I found that the areas that you liked were more kind of simple, but then looking at the other proposals, all of them are quite wordy. So just making sure, like, compared to other teams in the past, that.
So they say it's the, it should be short enough to be interesting and long enough to cover the essentials.
Okay.
But then funders just keep on asking the question why. You just have to justify. So it's not just simple assertion, but you have to explain a bit in just a short few lines. I would value also conciseness. Yeah, it's a challenge to do that one. But,
is it possible that we sent you, because our first draft didn't have the monitoring section, that like one piece, it's like one page, like can we send it to you just to take a quick look at it before we turn in the final draft?
I'll have a look at that one.
Thank you so
Usually
much.
What I do actually is that you should have submitted a later draft before the simulation for the donor to read it. But of course, we already had extensive discussion last week on it, so I did not require that anymore. Okay. But then, submit it if you still don't want to submit the entire document. If you perfectionist, but for sure, I'll be able. I should include your, as I see it now, I should include your proposal in the for future use as a sample document.
What would be the strengths of our proposal compared to what you've seen before?
The strengths right now, I think it's I think I was able to focus on you more because you're just one group. And I was able to, even without any physical presence, and we did not run a workshop in a classroom setting, I was able to just look into your project. And I think that matters. And now, as I have seen the presentation that you have, it's just the coherence. I really appreciate the coherence that you have. Like, one main goal, and then three results, 3 activities. They are just coherent and consistent. And I think I appreciate it for its coherence, and also it's elegant, and it's it's simple, but then you've done a theory of change, so I know that you understand the complexity, and you approach the project immediately with a critical mind. Ever since when we started this course, you've been critical about this and that. You say this too simplistic. So you're already very mindful about that, and you kept that as a challenge. Because other students and groups, we just like to do the assignment without really thinking. I think you have put so much thinking and effort into it.
Yeah, just so you know, like, we've been meeting so much. We've had so many long meetings, so much back and forth, because like it wasn't enough for us to just do the assignment. We wanted to understand it. We wanted to learn how to work better as a team. Like, everybody's been putting in a lot of time into this.
I've noticed that, especially in this presentation that you have. I mean, that's why I mentioned the term, it's professionally done. But you are professionals in your own right. I mean, you are young professionals in your own right. That's why I'm actually a believer that if you decide to do your internship, I'm a believer that students should be paid for their internship, because they are working in organizations as professionals.
I was gonna say, like, you mentioned UN Women in New York, and I was like, I love that, but that's impossible. Like, I mean, New York is so expensive, and like UN Women doesn't give money. That's the only reason why I didn't even think of applying there because, you know, I think the options were like Stockholm or New York, and that's so pricey.
But they have now, well, ILO carried out or initiated the so-called pay your interns movement. So, I mean, that's the International Labor Organization. It's part of the UN system as well, which is good. I mean, they are fighting for decent and labor rights, decent jobs and labor rights. So they have to consider that as well. So yeah, I think we're done, and I would like to thank you also. I think I really hope that you have learned a lot from
Yeah.
this course, and this is an intensive course. I mean, in just a few weeks' time, maybe 6, 7, 8 weeks' time, you've learned a lot. So I've decided it into three. I've designed it into three: the terms of the trade. So you got, I think your vocabulary and terminology has expanded. You know, you can now, you know, you can talk about participation now, empowerment. You know, when I mentioned like the LFA, PCM, you already know them. PRA, you know those terminology already. You know the concept of sustainability, feasibility, indicators, QQT. I mean, and then the general trends, although we did it quickly in the beginning, but at least you now understood the general trends in development policy, you know, from needs-based to rights-based. Now there's so much talk about going back to needs-based. I mean, the economy has stopped. So what is important to be done now by governments is just to address the basic needs of people, meaning food, supply, clothing, and all. So
Mm.
and then after that, you now have you got the notion of the shift from state-led to market-oriented development, and from the MDG to the SDG.
Yeah.
And then gender issues, gender-based violence, those terminologies that you have, inequalities and all. And then we move to the biggest chunk of this course, which is on tools of the trade. And every meeting, you've acquired something new, you've learned something new. You've learned PCM, you know, from programming to problem identification, to the formulation phase, to financing, to implementation, monitoring, evaluation. We've gone through that. PCM, after you've learned the tools of problem 3, objective 3, strategy analysis. You've done the tools of stakeholder analysis. You've learned theory of change. You've learned as well uh, uh, what else? Participatory methods. And then the actual project proposal writing itself, how to write a quality proposal, how to assess them, monitor them, and evaluate. So those are the tools of the trade that you've learned. And then the tricks of the trade, you've always been conscious about all these issues. And then during our last session, we discussed about the political economy of development interventions. Just a reminder for you not to be naive in conducting a development interventions. You should understand the politics behind development process, you know, the real politic, you know. And then we did some, although we did it quickly, I mean, we had this case method, you know, a case on patronage politics, how to deal with politicians and all. And then, so you made an experience. We did some simulation game. You did role playing as well. You had the mind of the proponent and also as a donor. And you've done so many skills, writing, teamwork, reflexive, reading. We have many of those things. And then the I would just like to advise you to visit again the Moodle page that we have. I mean, it's comprehensive. All your outputs are there. I put a link into Padlet, and including the drafts that um, we've had and the comments that I made in your draft. They are all there in Moodle. You will have access to that. And I will just extend that one. And then all my lecture notes are there. I'm not sure about, I haven't recorded all this. I mean, who would still go back to the discussion that we had?
Me.
No, but I think the lecture notes and the reading.
Okay.
Um,
So, a
but
quick question.
I could find, I mean, I'm still using this new laptop, and then all my old files are in this old computer. I'm still negotiating to, because I thought that it would be synced with the new laptop, but it doesn't happen. And then the IT personnel said that I should go back there. And um, so um, so we also have this YouTube page. Just watch them all. I wasn't able to show all of them, including the funny one, because I haven't figured out how to make it really work here in Zoom, because it seems that you couldn't hear it. We couldn't hear it at the same time. So, but then the YouTube page is there. And then, yeah, view this course as, all the learning methods and all the materials uh, are as part of the learning process. I mean, it's not just the actual meeting that we had here, but the reading materials, including my lecture notes, uh, the interactions that you had among yourselves in a group. So those are part of the learning process. So yeah, I would like to thank you for the opportunity. I mean, it was really nice learning with you, and it also kept me busy during 2 months of quarantine. It seems that Finland is trying its best to go back to normal,
Yeah.
and I'm I'm opposed to that. I mean, there should be some substantive changes and
Yeah.
reforms done. I mean, the normal is abnormal to most, I think.
Fun. And in terms of the grade, so we all get the same grade, right? For the
That's
whole class.
usually the case. You can debate with me about that principle, but
No.
I'd rather, because it's a teamwork effort.
Yep.
And I don't have any insights about your internal group dynamics. But you will have this last part, remember, in the reflection and the learning process. I would like to read it. And then also in Moodle, there's the feedback there. Maybe you can do it later after you've submitted. Just feedback for me and for the course and for the program. I always go back to it anyway. Uh, so please answer that later on. It's just in Moodle. I think just 4 questions. And then the grades, as I said, my principle in group effort is that uh, I'd rather consider the lazy ones, the free riders, lucky to be in a strong, good group, rather than punish the good ones for having bad group members. Because there's always this tendency that, I mean, if you're a group of 4 and one is not performing well, and then the teacher noticed that that is so weak part and that would pull down the entire group, I don't want to do that. I'd rather consider the weak one, I mean the pain person, to be lucky to be in a stronger and good group. I don't want to punish the rest for the and I mean, you are teachers, you are in education. It's a trade-off. I mean, there's no perfect answer in this in assessment. As I said, I don't only value the final product itself, your proposal, but I would value and remember the process you've done for this course. And as I said, I believe that this course should be more than 5 ECTS.
Yeah.
We appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bon. It's been
Thank you so much.
Like one ECTS is about 27 hours, so it should only be 135 working hours. But I know you've done more. So
Yeah,
And-
more.
and I know it's been difficult with the time differences and things like that, and then also, I mean, to me personally, it's been a huge shame that we don't get to have like person meetings with you, because this class, I think for all of us, is really relevant to like the work that we're going to be doing. And it would have been incredible to be there in person and do all the other activities that we weren't able to do. But I mean, I'm happy with what we did. It's definitely
from the physical one, but it's good that this happened to us in a small group now, because it will be more difficult. If it were like you met John, they were like 20 plus. Just imagine how to manage the time there. That's why they make project management like 3 to 4 hours. Because imagine if they would present, let's say, their problem 3 alone, 4 presentations, and students like to speak, and you give them time to speak. So yeah, time management is a challenge for this course. But at the same time, you were not able to have the privilege of being assessed and also commented on by other in a larger group setting. Like for instance, someone would act as a donor to ask you read your work and all those things. But then I think we're just fine. I'm in a small group. I mean, sometimes now a key to leadership is that, not to get too much people involved. That goes against the principle of democracy and participation, I know. But I learned that before when I was a chief editor of a journal. I mean, just designing a website. I was working with a web developer. Don't get too much people involved. Because if you want to get things done, sometimes you need. I mean, I'm telling you.
Yeah, we definitely learned that. I mean, like sometimes we like spend like 2 hours talking about something, and then we like gave it to one person, and then they did it in like 20 minutes, and then we met again, and it's like, wow. And we all agreed, and it's like once the thing is ready, it's like everybody just agrees sometimes. So it's.
Yeah, that's also one of the skills you've learned in this course, because not everyone has this skill to work with others.
Yeah.
To work in a multicultural setting, in a multicultural group, is a skill. Not everybody has that kind of skill. That skill must be developed. And then, as I said, part of the training in group dynamics is that, how to deal with free riders, with pain people, how to deal with arguments and disagreements. And this in real life. So yeah, even though it's a mix of both assumption and reality, I hope that it somehow raises your awareness and consciousness about the development process. So
of course,
we'll see what will happen in the autumn. So yeah, in field work, or if there will be some courses. For instance, in current trends, I'll be teaching that in January. So you're still welcome to attend that if you would still have time. But we anticipate that our students next year would mostly be from here in Finland. So they are not just Finns, but they are these are foreigners living in Finland also. Because we cannot assume that those living outside Finland can come here one time. Finland may be out of this crisis soon, but not other countries yet. So.
And do you know, because I know in the States they just assume that all classes next semester will be online. There's no such assumption in Finland, right?
Yeah, there's no official statement yet. What I heard last time was that they won't make a national guideline on this. So they would just decentralize. That's
Yeah. As is the trend in Finland.
Evolve it to
No, just
local universities. And the universities may even decentralize or devolve that to different programs and units. They would just say DEICO, and EDOMA,
Yeah.
come up with your own proposal. But there are courses. The most challenging course for me, I think, to be transferred to distance education is actually this one, because the curriculum and the entire program itself is not designed as a distance learning module. I was asked actually by Sala during our meeting and the other from the education about that possibility. So she asked me, Tepo, and Tina whether our program can be made into a distance learning education online program. I said it can. It's possible. It's just a matter of design, because you can design a course in such a way that it would work. But so far, our program and our courses are not designed as distance learning module. So for this one, I never thought that this will be conducted like this, but somehow it worked in a small group. There are trade-offs. So,
yeah, I think it worked pretty well.
Yeah, it would have been. I'm so happy actually that we're 4 people, because I can't imagine there'd be like 17 other people. We would not have like as much time for feedback and discussions.
I would change the design if that would happen. Like I mentioned to you, John's group, they were more than 20. Yeah. And they are a group of five per group. So if everybody wants to have their time presenting,
Of course.
you can just let them speak. Yeah. So do you have any other questions? So once you submit your, I think, your project, usually we need 2 weeks to grade them, because right now I receive many projects from the other courses that I run. So I read many documents and essays. So, but I try my best to submit all grades within this month of May. So,
Okay. Yeah.
you have any other questions? So maybe I'll be seeing Laura and Clara around the UASCula.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm just here at home most of the time. So yeah, you can just send me emails if you have questions and other concerns. So if I don't reply, you just have to remind me. The same thing with other teachers. If they don't reply after 2 or 3 days, I think, just write them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's... Yeah. So,
Yeah.
thank
you
you
very much.
I hope that the course
Okay, thank you.
and meaningful for all of you. So
For sure.
I enjoyed it. It has been an interesting experience as well. So
Yeah. Well, thank you,
very
Bon.
much. It was
So much fun. Thanks everybody. Thanks team.
team.
Yeah. See
Bye,
you.
thanks.
See you, girls.
Good
Bye.
work.
Thanks.
Bye girls.
Bye.
Bye.
Mm.
Bye Ann.